Hello. As you saw on the first slide, you saw the title of the book, which was Accommodations, Assisting Students with Disabilities, A Guide for Educators. If you can see, the year is 2003, and this was a book that is put out by the Florida Department of Education, and Jim Horn was the commissioner at the time, and it fell under Exceptional Student Education, right there that you can see. And the second slide mentioned the chapters that we were going to cover. So let's go ahead and get started. I chose this book because it was in my repertoire already of resources that I had. Due to early elections and the COVID-19, a lot of libraries are shut down. So I was actually lucky that I obtained this material and reference from a teacher who retired last year. Some of it is dated, so as this will be a presentation, there will be a little bit of critiquing of it, and I did a little background work on it. So, chapter 1. So if I can do this, I'm going to try and hold this up so you can see, so you can take a look. Chapter 1 talks about accommodations. It does the what, why, who, and how. Then we have chapter 2, and that talks about focusing on your essentials, different steps and strategies, temporary supports, and background knowledge. The key on why background knowledge is so important, and understanding where a student is coming from. Chapter 3 is what can you change, instructional methods and materials, assignments and assessments, time demands and scheduling, learning environment, and special communication systems. This chapter deals with what accommodations that we might be able to provide as gen ed teachers in the classroom when we have students with exceptionalities in our classrooms. And the last one is just different resources. While dated, still some really good material in here. So that was our table of contents. So the first chapter on accommodation talks about what are accommodations, why can we use accommodations, and who is eligible, how are the decisions made. And through this book you will see there's a little guy scratching his head. They do a little summary of what we will read in the coming chapter, and then the material. So while this is going to be a 15-minute presentation, I'm going to go ahead and just touch on some key points. The book is about accommodations, and it does touch on the criteria needed for the book report. But things that stuck out to me were, one of them was, it says accommodations are really, quote, whatever it takes to assure students with disabilities the opportunity to participate as fully as possible in the general curriculum and ultimately earn a diploma. So that is our goal in understanding accommodations, whatever it takes to help the students succeed in their environment, changing that environment if need be, and getting them to a diploma, to graduation time. It talks in chapter 1 of instructional methods and materials, assignments and classroom assessments, time demands, learning environments, and use of special communication systems, which I think was in chapter 3, and that is some of the, we're going to touch base in every chapter, but we'll probably settle in chapter 3 a little bit. Why can we use accommodations? Well, over the past 25 years, this is what the book says, public schools have opened their doors to students with disabilities in ways that were once unimaginable. Parents and educators have worked toward providing education for students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment. Teachers have created special instruction methods and materials and collaborated with professionals to deliver educational programs in the mainstream and work towards inclusion. Now remember, this is a guide for educators, so it does go ahead and list the laws to ensure that students with disabilities have access to appropriate education programs. Federal and state laws and regulations require schools to provide accommodations. So I will read them, but I'm going to go ahead and hold up the text. And I underlined the text. It didn't come underlined. I underlined the text. or highlighted the text, I guess would be the right word. Education of all handicapped children, 1975. This law led the way to the less. This federal law mandated that children with disabilities be educated in the least restrictive environment. We know a least restrictive environment is inclusion, or our goal towards inclusion. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, 1997, provides even clearer mandates to students with disabilities to be involved in and make progress in the general curriculum. We know since then that this has been updated. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 provides rights for students with disabilities and includes those students who need accommodations but are not otherwise eligible for special education services under IDEA. The Americans with Disability Acts of 1990 prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. And then Florida state and district laws and regulations supports the mandate of federal laws. Students with disabilities in Florida have a right to accommodations and modifications. Very different. School districts are required to provide needed accommodations and modifications. So this book does meet the criteria on the laws, the legal definitions, and the responsibilities and procedures of the ESE population. It then goes on to tell us who is eligible, and who are these laws mandated for. And who is eligible? Students who have been properly evaluated and staffed into programs. Students with disabilities are eligible for accommodations. So the category of exceptionalities, there's 13 of them. Of them is SLD, a specific learning disability, MH, mentally handicapped, EH, DHH, which is deaf, hard of hearing, VI, visually impaired, PI, physically impaired, SLI, speech language impaired, autism, and then there's orthopedic and other health, I think, under that. So this just tells you, it does give you a brief description of what the exceptionalities are. Okay, so the book did meet that criteria on the characteristics, behavior, cognitive, and physical, and behavior. I said behavioral already. So it does go into that briefly on it. It doesn't expound on it, but it does go into briefly. So the how of this, how are these decisions made? These decisions are made, we've talked about this, usually a parent or a teacher will see there's something going on, and this is for special education, and then testing is done, and then there's some different modalities that are used to decide how a student is placed and where a student is placed and what level of accommodations might be needed for the student with a disability. So it says the planning process, a team of professionals, family members, and students makes decisions about what accommodations the student needs for their educational program, and as well for testing. So not just for everyday life in school. I found this very interesting. These accommodations also have to be for testing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The IEP team discusses what accommodations would be necessary for the individual student to be successful. Questions that they might ask is, does the student have the fundamental skills needed for this grade level or course? Does the student have the necessary background or experience? How independent is the student in completing assignments and tasks? Does the student work fast as others in the class? What kind of testing and assignments are typically used in the program? Can tutoring or a buddy program be used? Will teachers need extra support? So there's quite a few. I just listed some of them, but those are some questions that are asked going into putting a child in an individual education program and or 504. So students with accommodations may receive in the classroom. So we talked about testing. So this was dated material. This book was dated, so 2003. And one of the things I read, so this is going to be a critique of it. One of the things I read was Don't forget, no, that's not it. Okay. Some accommodations that students may receive in the classroom are not allowed on the FCAT, the Florida Comprehension Assessment Test, because they change what the test is intended to measure and affects the test reliability and validity. Later on, down in a paragraph, it says, if accommodations are recommended for classroom instruction or testing that is not permitted on the FCAT, parents must be notified and give their signed consent for the use of those accommodations in the classroom. Parents must acknowledge in writing that they understand the possible impact or future consequences of using the accommodations of classrooms that are not permitted in the FCAT. And I was like, whoa, that doesn't sound right at all. 2003. Okay, so here we are, 2020. And I did go ahead and I went and found a list of accommodations for students presently if they take the FCAT, what accommodations are allowed. And I mean, the wording is very detailed, but it definitely says, if they use large print, then they get large print. If they use a calculator, then they get a calculator. It even goes on to say how the FCAT is now modified for English language learners. So that was a very, I don't know if you can see it, but that was a good reference to look up and cross-examine, because I was like, I just don't think those rules probably apply in today's day and age. So, all right, we're moving along. We are now, that was chapter 1. Chapter 2, I'm not going to go into a lot because it's most of the stuff I think we became aware of in our practium. Phonemic awareness, basic text structure, organizing, scientific inquiry, introducing new concepts and procedures and how we should model that. So chapter 2 really was, stuff we know, scaffolding, how it works, why it works, how we implement it. I might be assuming that you know that, but I think most of us at this level have seen some of everything that's listed in chapter 2. Prime background knowledge, definitely you can't build upon something that a student doesn't know. I'm guilty of that. I am horrible at math, and that is because I lack basic math skills. But the ability to learn new information often depends on how easily and effectively students are able to relate it to their own knowledge, and also how quick can they draw it, how quick they can draw it from that compartment that it's stored in and bring it out and understand it. And then fluency and generalization, and that's just, understanding, learning is enhanced when multiple reviews and checks are conducted. Learning is enhanced through well-designed feedback. It's enhanced when students have the opportunity to work towards mastery. Very important. You always want to set a student up for success if you can in this situation, and that's why scaffolding is such a useful strategy to use with students. It really helps them build their mastery and their confidence. So, chapter 3, where we ask ourselves, what can we change? We can't change a lot because that's where accommodations and modifications come into play. We can accommodate a student all we want, but we ourselves cannot dictate a modification. And a modification would look like where a student is put on access points, and that comes from a level that is beyond us and a whole nother book report or whatnot. So providing accommodations for students with a disability means that you need to change the way you test and you teach. Not them, the way you test and the way you teach. The way I test and the way I teach. So general things to consider the book suggests, and I will go ahead and show you that way you can see it. But can the student learn from the same kind of instruction that I give? If not, how can the student successfully acquire information? Can the student participate? If not, how do I change that? Can the student work as fast as the rest of the class? If not, then how do I schedule and give opportunities for the student to be able to be successful? And can they manage the independent and group work? And if not, what adjustments do I have to make? So this was a great book as far as it does give you instructional methods and materials. And what it does is it has about 2 to 3 pages of recognizing the challenge, and then as well as strategies to help the student. So that is a big chunk of this book. Accommodation for students who have difficulty understanding lectures and discussions. Accommodation for students with vision and hearing impairment. Accommodations for students who have difficulty with mathematical concepts and processes. Me. And then it goes on to how you would change your assessments and assignments. Accommodations for students who have difficulty completing the assignments, working in small group, behavior issues, and then students who have difficulty taking tests. I am one of them. I am a horrible test taker. So I found that part really good. A lot of good information in it, like just a lot of tangible information that you can get into and just read. And it's not a big book at all. You can see I read it within 2 days, and that was with different demands I had on my schedule. Okay, so one of the areas for me was learning environments. Big, because that is one of the most manageable things we have in our classroom to help students across the board. Behavior, physical, mental, hard to reach, remedial readers. So learning environment, that is your classroom, how you set it up, and the vibe you have in there. So that is big. Accommodations to a learning environment that help with behavior management. It has suggestions for students with common learning problems, attention short span, difficulty working in groups. And once again, it goes through and it's got 3 or 4 pages that address different issues. And then you can just flip through it and you can go ahead and you can find it. So in chapter 3, it ends with special communication systems. One of the things that's near and dear to me because I work with the augmentative communication systems, the core board. That's one of the things, like if you had a student that came to you, it would probably be very untypical that, not typical that a nonverbal student might come into a gen ed class, but I could see a student with limited speech functioning coming into a gen ed class, and core board and sign language are great communications tools. So it also goes on about having actual sign interpreters, finger spelling, and students who are they have a cochlear but they lip reading. So now it's on me to slow down my words so that you can understand the lesson. I have to change the way I teach. And then last, it is about the IEP and 504. Another critique I would have about this book is that it does nothing to tell you about the 504. It says basically, if it has a 504, contact your district and see how that works. But it does go on to say a little bit about the IEPs. However, it is dated. I've seen IEPs right now, and they look a little different. And there's a lot more to them than it was in 2003. But I'll wrap this up. It says if you have more than one student, this was actually a tip. So anticipating your students' needs. If you have more than one student with a disability in your class, it's a good idea to make a chart for your lesson plan with the names and the accommodations needed by each. This will serve as a reference. So I thought that was a really, really good tip that was in the book. So you can go back and just reference it. We talked about modifications, so that is modifications are needed. That does not come from us. That comes from somebody else. That's usually some paperwork and an ESE teacher and an admin, and I'm not even sure if it's the admin, but I know it's a little bit more work. And then last but not least, it is very encouraging with don't do it alone. Keep your door open for input and ideas about working with students with disabilities. When you are experiencing problems, don't be afraid to ask for assistance. You may find that teachers have the same problem. So, and then reflect on your impact. And then it has a lot of great resources at the end of it. Even though they're dated, there are some, accommodations and the Florida Administrative Code with the accommodations. You might have to cross-reference because they are dated. So one of the things the book did answer, but it was how will you use this book or what I might have learned in this book to promote the core value of respect. So while I was doing my research, some of the key things that stuck out in the reading was asking the student about accommodations, like what accommodations have you used already, what has worked for you, what if I bring these accommodations to you, are there any of them that you prefer more? Because really the student will know what's best for them. At the same token, if a student doesn't want to use an accommodation because they feel it's going to single them out and they might get made fun of, that's one of the barriers, is, you know, the attitudinal barriers. You really have to respect that and figure out a way to, I don't know, figure out a way to make the accommodation something that they want to use, or really brainstorm and get with other teachers and just tackle that, you know, or family, or, you know, friends. How do we tackle this? This is a great modification, or I mean great accommodation for the student. I think it would be so helpful, but this is the roadblock we're hitting, so how do we go forward? I think when you teach a class as a whole about people being different, that is one of the things, you know, if it's age appropriate, I think you should teach the ADA. Why is the ADA there? What does it do? How is it beneficial? How can you be an advocate for your classmates? So that's age appropriate. Little kids, I would find a book or books or videos that teach connecting kindness to differences. If you connect someone being different and you're kind, then that's big. Connecting kindness to differenceness. And then peer supports. When I worked in middle school, we had some bad kids, but we had some really great kids that were peer supports for our kids. So advocating that so that other students see those kids being role models. So I've used up a lot of my time, and that is my presentation. So it was good diving into that. Like I said, it was dated, but it was what I had due to the circumstances. But it did allow me to do some cross-referencing and checking, especially when the FCAT came up. So, all right, hope you enjoyed it. Bye.